Now, you might think that I have abandoned or forgotten this podcast because said I would update in about a week, and I'm sure it's been a month or two. I'm sure when I look back at YouTube, it's going to tell me and it's going to shame me for how long it's been. I have not forgotten about this podcast, as it were. I have, like any other person, been a little into other things, and this project has gotten put on the wayside. If you don't know me in real life and you don't know what my new interests have been, since I've last recorded this podcast, I've been really into tabletop RPGs. So I'm very interested in Dungeons and Dragons right now, and I'm very interested in Vampire the Masquerade. I have joined one group of people that I know for Dungeons and Dragons. They were in progress, and I have another group of friends who's going to play with me. None of us have ever been in a campaign. One of the players has, the other two have not, and I will be the DM for that game. So that'll be something to look forward to. I've known two of the three people for years, and one is a close friend of one of the people in that group. So I think it'll be a really solid group of people, and we're all just there to have a good time. In my D&D adventures of learning about D&D and watching a lot of YouTube videos, the channels that I would recommend for anyone who might be, what is Dungeons and Dragons? How do I get into it? Maybe I don't have friends, but I'm really interested in hearing about the source material and how other groups play it. I would recommend the Dungeon Dudes channel. They've been just such a joy to watch. I really like GM tips, Guildmaster tips on Geek and Sundry. That is with Matthew Mercer and Satine Phoenix. I've really enjoyed Handbooker Helper with a very catchy jingle that's by the Critical Role team, and that is on their YouTube channel. And I have been watching Critical Role. Critical Role is famous, as is the Adventure Zone by the McElroy brothers. Since I've watched a lot of anime and I've played a lot of video games, I decided to watch Critical Role because so many of those players are just so formative for my growing up listening to Funimation dubs. So I have a soft spot in my heart for Laura Bailey. So I went with Critical Role. I'm on episode 7, and I'm just in love with the cast, in love with the characters, in love with the actors and actresses themselves. So that's been really fun to watch. And I also, in my tabletop world, I've started to watch LA by Night for Vampire the Masquerade, and I absolutely love. I'm on episode 2, but I've really been enjoying watching Erika Ishii play Annabelle, and I love Jasper the Nosferatu, and that is on. Let me check my tabs and see if that's on Geek and Sundry, or if that's on Critical Role. That is on Geek and Sundry's channel. I watched all of Undeadwood on the Critical Role channel, and the setting is 1870s Dakota, and that's like a supernatural Western show that was fantastic. For one-shot RPGs, let's say you have a couple of hours, but maybe you don't want to get into a long campaign like Critical Role or The Adventure Zone. Undeadwood is 4 parts, but if you want maybe a one-shot RPG, I really enjoyed on Critical Role watching Honey Heist 2 Electric Bear Glue, and the GM for that is Marisha Ray. I also have really enjoyed Crash Pandas, Too Fast, Too Curious, and the GM for that is Sam Riegel. And both Crash Pandas and Honey Heist are written by the same guy, and he does one-shot RPGs. So those are both really fun. the other one shot that I've really enjoyed on Critical Role is they do a Call of Cthulhu session where the storyteller for that is Taliesin Jaffe, and that is with Murish O'Ray, Travis Willingham, Erica Ishii, and they do have another player whose name I'm not familiar with because he's not a regular on either Geek and Sundry or Critical Role, but he does a phenomenal job. So I would... Oh, and Liam O'Brien. Liam O'Brien is in that campaign, and he's quite a character. So I definitely recommend the Call of Cthulhu one-shot, the 2 Honey Heist 2 Electric Bear Glue, Crash Pandas, which I've actually recently rewatched. I've just started LA by Night. I am watching Critical Role and Undeadwood. I'm trying to get anyone who will listen to me to watch Undeadwood. And I have a friend, a close friend of mine, who she's getting into D&D, and she will be DMing for the first time in the next couple of months. And she very much loves the Adventure Zone. So she is not in this podcast, but if she were here, she would say, go watch the Adventure Zone. That's a recommend from her. So that's what I've been up to recently. I've been very into Dungeons and Dragons. Sorry, a few more plugs for me for Dungeons and Dragons. If you're interested in dice or a little bit of decorating, not as much emphasis as dice making, there's Ribinator. I love his channel. There's the Bard's Craft for large-scale wargaming terrain. And I don't always watch him. I don't know if I like him, but he has valuable information, and that would be Black Magic Craft. I will try to remember to link all of these below. I say try, but I will remember because these are all the channels I've been watching frequently. So I will put their links in down below. I'm pointing, you can't see that, down below in the description. If you're interested in any of these tabletop sources that I have been over the moon with, they keep my workday full of excitement. There are things I like to watch when I get home. I like to think about them at work. So, some tabletop, watching some campaigns, watching some one-shots, getting into terrain building, thinking about dice building. I'll put those links below. Those are things that have just really been enhancing my personal life. So, I can't recommend them enough. I need something to do when I'm crafting. In my recent craft world, I've been knitting, as always. I've been hand quilting, and I've been enjoying that so much. And I have been doing cross stitch. So I did a bit of machine sewing, but it's been raining and I haven't wanted to walk over to where the machines are. So that's on pause for now. So the meat and potatoes of the podcast, books. I haven't been reading as much as I stated, or not reading as many books. I've been reading about Dungeons and Dragons and Vampire the Masquerade, but I will not be doing a depth-by-depth analysis of either of those core books. I don't know if there's an interest, and I don't know how much, as a new player, I would be able to elucidate you on the information there within. I think that the channels I just told you about would do a much better job of that than I would. So, since I've last recorded the podcast, I did finish Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, and I did finish Pride and Prejudice. When I started reading Pride and Prejudice, I started taking bullet point notes of what happened, so that when I come back to record, we have a more solid basis of which to go on about what happened in the book. But for Crawdads, I hadn't started writing bullet points yet, so it's just going to be what stuck out from the book. Since it's been a little, it's been a hot second, too, since I read it. I finished it, like I said, probably a month or two ago, so a refresher on Crawdads. We have our main character, Kaya, who lives in the marsh. Her father is MIA, her mother is MIA. She has Jumpin', who is one of the storekeeps, in the colored area. That is what the book refers to it as, of town. And Jumpin's wife, Mabel. And Kaya was seeing Chase Andrews, whose family is some of the more wealthy people who live in the town. And sorry, I'll get into Chase. And there's also Tate, who was Kaya's flame back when they were younger. And they were together, but when he decided to go to college, he realized that Kaya can't live in society. And so he dumped Kaya, and he's come to regret that decision. And those are the main cast that we're talking about. Where we left off in the book is because it's a murder mystery coming of age. I can say finishing the book, of course this is a full spoilers, I can say finishing the book that it doesn't really succeed on being a murder mystery and is mostly just a coming of age with some court drama in it. The last third of the book is court drama, court intrigue. So I will go through the book now. Chase Andrews is, as we learned in the last episode, Chase Andrews is dead. That's also part of the framing device of the book. We know that he's going to die well before we meet him. So Chase Andrews is dead, and he had a necklace that he wore that Kaya gave him that was made of, I want to say, feathers of a marsh bird. And when his body was found by the police, his mom says, look, his necklace isn't there. And he always wore this necklace, and it's very strange that... One sec, I'm going to grab a blanket. It's very strange that this necklace isn't on his body because he fucking wore it all the time. And so the police end up arresting Kaya on suspicion of murdering Chase Andrews. And they decide to hold a trial. There's not any physical evidence that Kaya is the murderer. He was found at the base of the watchtower, and there were no particular wounds that would suggest a cause of death. They say he fell from the top of the watchtower, but there's no signs of struggle. There's no footprints coming in or out of the marsh, that sort of thing. But the police say, look, if he was killed here, then there wouldn't be any footprints because the marsh tides would have washed them out. And so they kind of just suspect Kaya because she's poor, she lives in the marsh, no one's there to protect her, she's kind of disenfranchised. And because his mother knows that Kaya and Chase were together and that Chase, is engaged to always wears pearls, and that so Kaya kind of got left in the dust. So for the court trial, what ends up happening, and I mean, the court trial is not a short one and done thing. The court trial is probably about a third of the book. So I'm really going to be summarizing the arguments of both the defense and the prosecution in this in kind of a brief order because the lore of the book is not the events that happen, but the writing style themselves. So I'm doing a lot of condensing here, but I do think that there is merit in reading the book for the style that Delia Owens writes in, because the writing quality of the book is quite good. And even though the plot beats weren't the greatest plot beats I'd ever read or will ever read in my life, I did find the book compelling, so that when I was at work and I would be reading it on my break and my break would end, I'd be like, oh, I want to go find out what happens in the book. I don't want to go back to work. But maybe work is always like that, no matter how good the book you're reading is. So anyway, during the court trial, Kaya is staying in the courthouse jail. And she didn't reach out to her brother, but Tate does reach out to her brother. So he comes to support her. Jumpin and Mabel also come to support Kaya in court. And Tate comes every day to support Kaya in court. I don't know if I mentioned it in this part, so it's good to go back and remember that when Tate came back, Tate graduated from school. A couple of years passed. There is a time skip in the book. And Tate ends up working at a science institute that studies the marsh that's not too far from Kaya's home. and he encourages Kaya to write source books for different kinds of life. She has ones on birds. I think she does one on maybe shells. And she has a couple that she publishes. So by the time the court trial comes, Kaya has a little bit of standing, not with the townspeople, but kind of with the academics, because she's written, I think at this point, she's written 2 books and published 1 book. And so that's something to keep in mind, is that she is known a little outside of her community, because her work is just so detailed, and it's the most recent and kind of put together source book that the Marsh has. And so she's on trial, and her main defense is, I could not have committed the murder of Chase Andrews because when he was murdered, I was in the city, and I don't remember the city, but it was established. It's where Chase and Kaya went for a date when they were earlier in their relationship, and they went to the hotel and they had sex for the first time. It's that city. It's that larger city. So the publisher for Kaya's books said, like, hey, like, do you want to come to the city and come kind of meet some of the publishers? And so she's kind of hesitant on it, because she's, she, since that time with Chase, she hasn't really left the Marsh and gone to the larger city, but she does agree to go on this trip. So her main defense is, I couldn't have killed Chase because I wasn't in the city. I was a distance away, and I was checked into the hotel. I was there, all evening, and then in the morning I met with my publisher. So she has an alibi. So how the court case is structured is actually fairly a better depiction of court, I would say. I mean, I've never been in court, but it's a witness on the stand. The prosecution will ask questions, and then the defense will do the cross witness. So I think it's actually quite good in that aspect. So there's maybe 3 or 4 witnesses that get called up, and I'll talk about them. One witness that gets called up is one of the guys who, like, they kind of have a boat in town, and they're like a fisher, and he is across the bay from where Kaya and Chase were the night that Chase attempts to sexually assault Kaya. And so he sees the 2 of them from across the bay, and he sees that they're yelling. And ooh, yikes. I was going through my notes on my computer, and I'll draft up messages, so that one was a big yike. Okay, anyway. He saw them across the bay yelling at each other, and he says that he heard Kaya say that, I want to kill you, basically. And so the defense points out, how do you know it was Kaya? So he says that he saw the boat, and that he knows what her boat looks like, even though it was dark and the moon wasn't out, but he could identify her and the boat and hear her. And so the defense says, look, if it was dark, how do you know it was her boat? She doesn't have a unique style boat. It's a common skiff. And he also kind of points out that you don't know why she said that. And he kind of alludes to the fact that Chase Andrews was attempting to assault Kaya, and that could lead to anger. That she wasn't just angry, but you don't know the context of what happened in that conversation. Yes, you can attest that's what you heard, but you don't know the whole backstory about that whole conversation and that whole experience, especially because the fisherman pointed out that she looked upset, she looked angry, and she did look kind of disheveled. And so that's what they do on that witness. There's a witness in town. I don't know if it's the bus driver specifically, but there's a witness who says they saw Kaya board the bus leaving the big city to go back to town the evening of Chase's murder. And they say, I saw Kaya board a bus. I saw her leave And, I didn't see her come back, but I can confirm that I saw her leave. The defense says, how do you know it was Kaya that you saw? Because they describe a tall, lanky male, just kind of tall, skinny male dude. And so my first thought when I read this is like, how do you even know that's not just her brother? Because her brother kind of lives near the big city. And so that's the defense's main argument is, how do you know that was Kaya? You were across the street in the store window, I think. Were you paying that close attention? Can you say, because this is a murder trial, can you say with complete confidence that this is Kaya that you saw? And the witness is like, no, I can't. So they prove themselves there. And then the other argument that the prosecution makes on one of the witnesses, not necessarily this witness, but on one of the witnesses is, Kaya could have bussed back and then taken her skiff over to the tower, killed Chase, and then came back and boarded the bus to be back in the morning. And it's not a bad line of thought, but the prosecution rightly points out, you are bringing up this possibility for the first time in court and you have not looked into it. What were the tides like? Because they say possibly, if the tide was that, if the tide was this. And the defense rightly points out, as is their job, that you should know what the tide was like on that night. If it was possible, if it wasn't possible, you don't have the chart, you don't have the proof, and you haven't researched it. This is a line of conjecture, and you cannot persecute my client on a line of conjecture when you don't even have the evidence to tell us what the tides were like. So part of what they argue is that Kaya took the bus in the evening and that she used the tides in her advantage to get to the beach, to get to the tower really quickly. And then she pushed Chase from the tower. And then after she pushed Chase from the tower, she was able to ride the tide, which was like in her advantage, back to the city, board the bus, and be back so that in the morning it could seem like she'd been there all night. So I was gonna go, argument by argument, but that's the big argument. I don't necessarily need to go witness by witness. And the defense points out that it's like I said earlier, the defense is like, okay, sure, if that happened, where's the fucking proof? Okay, the proof of burden is on you, Mr. Prosecutor. During this whole prosecution, Kaya does not take the stand herself, so she's pretty distant. She doesn't disassociate entirely, but she's pretty distant from her surroundings. And so in the end, this will be a short episode. Okay, I mostly have talked about D&D and Vampire the Masquerade, and that was about half of this recording. So basically what happens is the defense says, look, this is all conjecture. You don't have any evidence, you don't have any physical evidence to pin my client to being in town and at the tower the night of Chase's murder. All you have is witnesses who say they may have seen Kaya, they may not have seen Kaya. You don't have anything solid to pin her on. And you can't say that she was guilty because this necklace was missing. You haven't recovered the necklace. You don't know where the necklace is. You don't have any physical proof that connects her to the scene of the crime. You don't have a case. You don't have a case. You don't know what's happening. You need to convict somebody and you don't have a case, so you went after my client. And so the jury does find that Kaya, I don't remember right now if she was acquitted or if she was not guilty, but she is not convicted of the murder of Chase Andrews. And because they're like, yeah, like, you're absolutely right, there's no evidence. After the trial, it starts to jump around in time again. She and Tate end up getting back together. She continues to live in the marsh for the rest of her life. That's her home that she's made for herself. Tate's father, actually, fantastic. I think his name is Skipper. He has some development. So he's working during the trial. And then at some point he's like, my son is at the courthouse every day for this woman. And if, she's family to Tate, she's my family. So he actually leaves his boat and goes to be in the courthouse every day with all the other supporting cast. So that's a really cool moment. Not cool, but that's a moment of development that he has. So anyway, Kaya, Tate's dad just died pretty soon after the trial. Like I said, time skips around, but I don't think it's too long that passes. Oh my god. Sorry, I'm playing Final Fantasy 14 while I'm doing this. And I just hit level 50, so I just got a bunch of stuff on screen. Oh my god. I'm learning so many things. Alright, let's learn what I just learned. Legendary nodes and tomes of regional folklore. Among unspoiled gathering points, there are legendary sites that can be discovered by acquiring tomes of regional folklore. Each volume contains the tales and traditions of a particular region, and using the item adds this information to your gathering log under special. Volumes you have obtained can be reviewed in your gathering log. There are many valuable resources out there waiting to be found, and it begins by collecting tomes of regional folklore. Wow, I'm doing some achievement hunting while I record this. I am currently mining 2,000 times in the Black Shroud. So, I am doing that. Kaya's dad dies. Skip time. Time is skipped. That's where we left off. Hold on, let me read my new abilities. Utilize your expansive knowledge of mining to uncover collectibles amongst regular items. Appraise a gathering node for collectibles. And improves next item rarity increased by 50%. Fascinating. Okay. Okay, I'm back with you all. Thanks for waiting. Kaya, Tate's dad, does pass, and it's sad because we learned more about Tate's dad when he decided to come to the trial to support his son. And what ends up happening is that Tate moves in with Kaya. They make up and they do end up together romantically. They don't end up having any kids, but they do end up being happy and staying together. I'm not sure if they explicitly get married, but they stay together. And Kaya predeceases Tate, and when Tate is cleaning the house out after her death and just kind of going through her belongings, he finds a floorboard that's loose in the house. When Kaya dies, because Kaya, remember, had bought the land that her family owns. She went and she bought it when she learned how to read, and she got the money from her first book. So she owns the land, and she owns that part of the marsh. And so when Kaya dies, Chase says that, everything she has will go to her brother, and that all Tate wants is the house, and he thinks the brother will let him have him, which he does. And so Tate is cleaning through the house, and he finds kind of a loose floorboard in part of the house. And before he even opens it, he says he knows what's in it. And so he opens this floorboard, and I want to say it's like a wrapped parcel. And so when he opens it, there's the feather necklace that Chase Andrews wore. And there's a collection of poems by Kaya's favorite poet that she quotes throughout the book. And so this is when we as the reader find out two important details. The first is we find out the fate of the feather necklace. So this is when we find out who killed Chase Andrews. I don't think this is surprising necessarily, but it is confirmed that Kaya killed Chase Andrews, and that the version of events that the prosecution put forward is what happened, but because they didn't have any solid evidence for her conviction, she walked free, but she didn't murder Chase Andrews. And the stack of poems that we find out that the poems that she's been quoting and the poems throughout the book were written by Kaya herself, and she submitted those to the paper for publication. And so Kaya, aside from being a marine, like a marsh biologist, is also a poet. I think what's weird about this reveal is it left me completely unsatisfied because, and I don't often read murder mysteries. I wouldn't say it's a genre that I'm moving the mic closer to me. I'm moving the coffee table. Murder mysteries aren't a genre that I have a lot of experience with. They're not a genre that I read often. And so I can't tell you how satisfying this is in general for a murder mystery or how typical it is, but I can say that it was kind of disappointing to be like, oh, you know, Kaya had a life and she lived a good life. Yeah, she murdered that guy. And yeah, the prosecution was right. I wouldn't say it's bittersweet. I wouldn't say it's upsetting. I would just say it's just kind of So I think it's a weird case too because Kaya killed Chase because of his attempted assault, which makes very much a lot of sense, right? And so I think that you don't look at his murder as like, you see his murder as like, oh, he had it coming, right? And so I think that finding out Kaya did do it is, I don't know what weight it has. I don't know if I'm supposed to see her in a sympathetic light. I don't know if I'm supposed to be like, yeah, like she fucking got away with it. Like, I'm not really sure what I, as the reader, am supposed to feel. And I feel like there's not enough I almost feel like I almost feel like Delia Owens didn't want to really make a statement about what emotion we as the reader should feel about Kaya being the murderer, because it's glossed over. You would think that her killing someone would not be glossed over, but when Tate finds the evidence, he's more taken aback that she was a poet and that she was submitting poems than the fact that she did actually murder a dude. And so, as the reader, that kind of leaves you lost because you're looking to the characters to have an indication about how you as the reader are supposed to kind of feel. And he basically just is like, yeah, did you know she wrote poems? So that's kind of weird. And then so we find out that she killed Chase, and then we find out that she was a poet. And then it goes back in time to the murder. And this is how we find out basically the prosecution was right. And it talks about her disguising herself, getting on the bus, using the tides to her advantage to get to the tower, inviting Chase to the tower, taking off the necklace, and then pushing him into the plummeting below to his death before getting on her skiff and hauling ass and getting back on the last bus. So it does confirm that. And the thing I remember most about the description is she brings up the fireflies, like she did earlier in the book, about how female fireflies will change their strobe lights to lure, L-U-R-E, mates to them, and then once they've mated with their own males, they'll change the strobe pattern to attract other species and then kill them. So in the description of Chase's murder, she does compare herself to the fireflies from earlier in the book. And so after that, I think the book gives us another poem or so and it ends. So it's I was at work when I finished this book, and it just kind of left me with a which is always a weird experience to have with a book. With fan fiction, it might be more understandable, but I feel like fan fiction has a greater arc of what it's trying to accomplish, because so much of fan fiction is rooted in there is a couple. How does this couple get together? I feel like fan fictions have a very solid understanding of intro conflict and conflict resolution. So I feel like it's more rare for a fan fiction to end on a kind of note, because in a lot of fan fiction, the characters getting together and having their ending is what the story is crescendoing to. And I feel like fan fiction authors are very much willing to be like, okay, we did it. Like, you know, Aziraphale and Crowley, they got together. They're living their happy ever after in the Armageddon that didn't happen. And they live in South Downs, and that's it. The story is over. And so I always feel a little unmoored when I finished a published novel and it doesn't have that same sort of, not clarity. I feel like a fanfiction author is willing to say, like this is the point of the work. I've banged you over the head. Here's the moral of the story. Here was the point that we were all culminating towards. To where the novel does end, but I don't really know what the point that we culminated to was. Because she died, right? So it's not, you know, that. And because it goes past, like, if the novel had ended, let's say, if the novel had ended and, you know, Tate found out, like, oh my god, if the novel just ended and said, oh my god, Kaya is the killer, and he was surprised by it, and it made him reevaluate their time together or something, then I would, like, I would kind of, you know, feel more satisfied in the ending of the book. But he doesn't. He finds out that she murdered Chase, and he's more taken aback by, like, oh, she's a poet. And it doesn't, like, make him change any her being a poet is supposed to change more of our perception about Kaya than her being a murderer. And that's very weird to me, because I don't know about you, but I've written a poem or two in my life. I have some angsty ass poetry I have written. Okay, somebody writing poems in their life is not as surprising to me as somebody being a murderer. And so I just feel like the ending doesn't have impact, because the final impact of the book isn't like, oh, we found out who the killer was. The impact of the book is, we found out who the killer is, and she's a poet, and that the prosecution was right. So it just ends on such a unsatisfying note. And I think that the book ends by mentioning, like, blah, 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 where the crawdads sing, which is a reference to earlier in the book where the crawdads sing is a reference to kind of, like, somewhere so deep where you don't, like, talk about all the things that's happening. So I feel like, so I finished the book. I didn't know what to do. I think I walked around my office and I told my coworkers I'd finished my book. Because I don't know how to interpret it in its entirety. I don't know necessarily how or who I would recommend it to. And I don't know if finding out who the killer is gives it any reread value. I thought about this too. I would say the only case of me rereading it for the murder mystery aspect is I would want to reread the court sections and see if Kaya, in her internal monologue, if she ever says to herself internally if she is not guilty. I don't think she is, and that wasn't something I was looking for. She talks about her treatment, sort of, and how she feels, but I don't know if she ever claims innocence. So that would be something I might look at and think is weird if I did a reread. Maybe it's something that somebody reads it for the first time and it sticks out like a sore thumb. I'm not part of this murder mystery genre, so it's not something I was thinking about looking out for, because I presumed she was innocent. So I think for reread value, I would just see, like, does she say if she's innocent or not? When I recommend Crawdad, I think that I am glad that I read Crawdad, because I do think that Crawdad could have a place in discussion about literature in the future. I don't think the book is very well written, which is not something I can say for all published work. It is very well written and very descriptive, and I felt pulled into the world. Even when I don't necessarily didn't like the plot beats, I did feel very much in the world. So I think that Delia Owens does a great job of engrossing the reader into her setting and into her characters. So I think if you want to recommend a book to somebody who wants to know, how descriptive is the book, how well written it is the book, that sort of thing, I would and could recommend Crawdads. I think for somebody who is into a book more for its clear plot and like the path and the pacing of its plot, I don't think I could recommend Crawdads because I don't think I don't think the plot itself is groundbreaking. Nor do I think that I don't think the intention of the book was to be groundbreaking, and I don't think, yes, I got my accomplishment. I don't think that the intention of the book was to be groundbreaking, and I don't think necessarily every book needs to be groundbreaking. But I think if somebody is looking for different plot beats and, how do these plot beats fit together? How strong is it, that sort of narrative? I'm thinking a lot, sorry. If somebody is looking for a plot-focused narrative where the book is really moving because of the plot, this is not a plot-based book. This is definitely a character-focused narrative. And so I think that if I had a friend who's looking more for a narrative-focused plot-based narrative structure, I couldn't recommend Crawdads. But if it was a friend who's looking for a character-focused book and who's more into the writing and the style of the book, I would go for it. So I think it's a lot of style. Not to say it's style over substance. It's certainly not purple prose. But I think that the book is definitely more about the style and feel of the book than the kind of technical merits of the structure and the events of the book. So I would say if you see the book at the library, or maybe you have a friend who has the book and it's not reading it on their bookshelves, or who is willing to let you borrow it, I definitely do think it's a good read, and I would be interested to I am interested to see what other works Delia Owens has written. I really did enjoy her writing style. But I wouldn't want to read a murder mystery. I think that the murder doesn't strengthen the book. I think that so much of the strength of the book is the characters that adding the murder doesn't enhance the book for me. I would have been just as pleased just to see Kaya's life continue to evolve and how she interacts with society and how society views her. And I could definitely see an argument being made that the court trial is the lens by which we can see that in a condensed version without having to write out decades of her life. Potatoes. I'd definitely be interested for what other people think about the structure of the book. So I would say definitely borrow the book. Definitely go to the library and read the book. If you definitely are here for books for their feel, I would give it sort of wanderlust is the word that came to mind. It's not cozy. And it's not haunted like you might think a book in the marsh is. I would say it's like a rooted otherworldliness in the sense that Kaya is so isolated from the people around her, but she is just as human and talks about her humanity. So, and not poignantly in a way that she's, hitting you over the head with it, but she sees her own perspective, but it is like anyone else. And I think I don't know quite what word. I'm very much thinking. It's not heavy-handed, and it's not, like, exotic or anything like that. It's a good line of her talking through something that's unfamiliar to most of us, but talking about familiar aspects. So, the book is right now being sold $15 at Costco. So if you're, solid $15, and you might say, I got $15 to support an author. Otherwise, borrow a copy from a friend or your local library. I have cleared my bookshelf of that book, and I have lent it to my coworker. She probably won't read it, and she probably will forget that she has the book, but the book has left my home, which is my purpose in reading these books. The next recording I'll be doing is going to be Pride and Prejudice. I have finished all of Pride and Prejudice at the time of this recording, and I have all of the notes. I have to say, when I did my first discussion of Pride and Prejudice, I was not looking forward to reading it, and I thought it was the most boring book I'd ever started to read, but that quickly changed, and I found Pride and Prejudice to be incredibly engrossing, and I found it funny. I found it engaging, not in like haha funny, but like a good time. I found it engaging. It had me on the edge of my seat. I was at work and I'd be like, oh my god, I can't wait to go read Pride and Prejudice. So it did go from a book that I kind of rated really low internally to a book that I had a blast reading and taking bullet points about. So I'll be glad to talk to you all about Pride and Prejudice. I'm going to take my bullet points and type them up and just follow them. I might not even type them up. I'll, decide and talk through the whole book. We have about 200 pages of content to go through, which is the same length as Crawdads, but has a lot more plot beats happen a lot faster. But I did a pretty good job in my bullet points of sticking to plot points and not getting lost in the minutia. It is difficult because every conversation in Pride and Prejudice does have its own purpose to move the narrative forward, and it's not padding itself out. But I think I did a solid enough job of trying to keep it concise. It's hard for me, but I, tried. We'll see if I get back on the reading train or not. I hopefully will, as I have so many great books in my house to go through. But like I said, I've been on my tabletop RPG kick, so we'll see what happens. You guys will hear from me soon. I won't make you go as many months before I record another episode. And if you're sticking with me, then that's cool. If you're just hopping on, that's also cool. And I'll catch you guys next time with some Pride and Prejudice, with some other books. And, if you have any questions about any YouTube recommendations, any crafting YouTube channels, tabletop RPGs, terrain building, just shoot me a comment below or shoot me a message on my YouTube, or if you know me in real life, shoot me a message by phone or by Facebook. And I hope that all of you out there have your interests that you absolutely love, and you stick with them, and take care of yourselves out there. All right. Bye, everyone.